And I say this one next because it literally is next in the purchase and sale agreement by fluke. Number 14. So here's what happened. Here's the scenario that I'm going to provide and the incredible learning that I got from it about 6 or 7 years ago. There is an insurance clause in our purchase and sale agreement. And in fact, I remember having a conversation, I think, with your Dylan about this maybe a month or two ago, and we talked pretty in depth about it.
Yeah,
Right.
that'd be about right.
Yeah.
It's the right timeline. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And basically, to sum it all up, there's an insurance clause to say that the seller will hold insurance on the property if it already exists. So it's not telling them that they have to, but I mean, if you own a property, you're going to. And the way it's kind of written like that is you might have vacant land. Well, there wouldn't be anything to insure on that, for instance. But that's the way it's kind of written. Mm-hmm. And here's where it gets interesting. So 99% of the time there's going to be insurance on that property. And what happens if there is substantial damage to the property while under contract to you as the buyer? Meaning you've firmed up on a property, you're waiting to close, and it closes in a month or two or whenever, tomorrow, doesn't matter. What happens to you as the buyer and to the contract? So, as I mentioned, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we talked about this earlier, and my answer previous to Gary's informative education that I got was that the seller would be responsible for fixing any damages, providing the home in the same condition it was purchased. And that would be it, that it would just, that the deal is still a deal. It's just that the seller would have to fix it, right? That was what I thought would be the right answer.
Yeah, and it is the right answer with some caveats to it, right?
Yep.
And the wording in there is in the event of substantial damage. Now, what's substantial? To me, a door handle has broken off and I don't know how to fix that, to there's a whole flood in the basement. What's the difference, right? And maybe a fair comment to that is if it can go through insurance, or if you're going to go through your insurance and provide a claim, that would be substantial damage. So here's the interesting thing. As a buyer, you are in full control, 100% control. The seller is not. In this case. So I'll use my scenario. And I thought I'd shared this story with Jen, but I was fortunate enough to be on another podcast last week and I shared it there. So I was doing I was the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. So just throw another curveball into this story. I show up for the home inspection. We had it sold to my buyer. We showed up for the home inspection to the classic 1950s semi-bungalow with a basement suite, right? One of my favorite type of properties to purchase as an investor. And I'm opening the door. It's probably end of February, and it had been minus 20 for like 18 weeks in a row. One of those.
Oh, man.
Right?
Yeah.
And I open up the door, and I hear what I think is the shower running. And I think to myself, This isn't good, because this is a vacant property. There's nothing in it, no furniture, nothing. And then, when you have that moment of, uh-oh, I know what's going on. And I run downstairs, and sure enough, I think it was right over the kitchen, the basement kitchen. It was a shower, to say the least. And water was pouring out of the pipes. So you quickly figured out how to turn the main water off and make a few phone calls. And the pipes had froze and had probably been flooding for at least a few days. So there wasn't inches of water. It had all been soaking up, but there were certainly lots of puddles, and it was nasty. It was terrible. Make a long story short, here's what happens in a situation like that. If we had been firm on that property, the buyer would have been in full control. And I'll explain it to you like this. When there's a flood like that, the buyer has the absolute right to walk away from the transaction and get their full deposit back with no deductions. Or they can take the insurance claim themselves. It can be directed to them so they can fix it, the buyer, upon closing. And it actually says that in clause 14. Now, here's where it gets a little murky, I'll say, is if the buyer's lender finds out there is an insurance claim on it, and especially during a flood, for instance, they may not want to lend on a property that's had that type of damage. So you can kind of see how all of a
Right.
sudden it gets a little murky or confusing. So what
Yeah.
we did in this case, we actually pushed the closing date out and had the homeowner, the current homeowner, the seller, repair it back to where it was. And of course, we ended up with new kitchen cabinets and things like that. So that's
Yeah.
exactly what we did. But it is interesting. I know, in fact, we've heard other stories of basically the day before closing, there's a leak through the ceiling of somebody that we know really well, Jen, and it basically destroyed the entire kitchen because it had rained incredibly heavily that day
Wow.
and destroyed
Yeah.
an entire kitchen. However, they still went through with the closing, and they were able to use the previous owner's insurance money to go fix all that stuff, which is really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. So those were the two things that I didn't know, that the buyer could choose to just walk away, which is kind of crazy, right? To think that, and it makes sense, but also a little scary, I guess, or concerning. And then my brain automatically goes to the lending part. It's like, okay, so I could get the insurance money, which is a good option because now I can do how I want to do it. If I'm going to renovate, I can pick what I like. So that's awesome as a buyer. But if the lenders find out, then I might not get lending on the property. And so then if you want to know whether you will or not, you'd still have to ask your lender. So how do you,
I
do you
know.
just roll the dice? Like
It's
a weird catch 22, right?
It's definitely a mortgage broker question. And it all depends on when it
Mhm.
happens too, right?
Yeah.
And there might
Yeah.
be different stipulations you can get written into the mortgage charge, for instance. And like, for instance, you're just buying a property that has knob and tube wiring in it or aluminum
Right.
wiring in it, right? And they give you X
Hmm.
amount of days after closing, X amount of days to remediate that. So there might be
Right.
some things around that could be negotiated with the mortgage broker and the lender, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
all
And in the
things, I mean,
insurance company too.
yeah, exactly. And these are all things, it's all right there in the pre-printed clauses. And I'm sure we could go through each and every one of them and have a kind of a unique story around it. But it's good to review them from time to time. So when you are asked by a buyer or seller, what does that mean? You don't have to sit there trying to, circle the wagons and try and figure out what it does mean.
Yeah.
There's a lot of,
Remember what was that story Gary told one
yeah,
time? Yeah.
exactly.